Welcome to Drupal 8 Day. Thank you guys for attending. It's my pleasure to introduce Mario. Mario is a front-end developer and themer with MediaCurrent who's been working with Drupal for about 10 years now. And his Drupal 8 presentation today is component-driven theming. Mario, thank you very much for joining us. I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thank you so much, Steve. I appreciate the opportunity to participate on this really great event. Happy birthday, Drupal 8. I'm sure everybody's excited about that, and very happy to have the opportunity to talk on this event to people out there who are interested in learning more about Drupal and Drupal 8 in particular. So thank you again, Steve, for putting this together. As Steve mentioned, my name is Mario Hernandez. I'm a senior front-end developer at MediaCurrent. And you can follow me on Twitter or LinkedIn, and the slides will be available to you at the URL that you saw earlier. We can also make them available on the session page that for the Drupal8.com website. I work for MediaCurrent, as I said before, and today's agenda is going to focus on identifying the problems that we're trying to solve by using component-driven development, describe how components work, what they are, and how they can benefit you, and some of the advantages of components when you implement this workflow, as well as some of the tools that we at MediaCurrent use to make this happen. And finally, we'll do a live demo, which is just a walkthrough of how everything works together. Some of you may be aware I've been written a blog series on this particular process, and so we've released already part 1 and part 2 of integrating components with Drupal. Part 3 will be released next week, and this demo will be focused on that series specifically. All the code, all the information is available on the blog, and you can take advantage of that. I'm also making available a demo theme that has all the code that the blog series is focused on, so you can also experiment with that as well. As I said before, I work for MediaCurrent. We're a Drupal-centric agency out of Atlanta, Georgia, but we are a remote team. We're all over the United States. We have a great group of developers and team in general. Very great place to work at. So if you are looking for an agency that really cares about Drupal, about giving back to the Drupal community, MediaCurrent may be the place for you. So check out our careers page to see if there's anything that may appeal to you. We're always looking for great talent. We build some of the great websites out there, Drupal websites. We worked with Weather Channel, different sports agencies, many higher ed education websites. So we work with great clients and great projects. So we have a really great team in place. So we encourage you to take a look at our careers page. So, why do we want to start all of a sudden work with components? What is the problem that we're trying to solve here? Just because something is hot or is the latest trend, that doesn't mean we just have to drop everything and start doing it ourselves. I do have particular reasons why I prefer components over top to bottom traditional theming. And I'm sure everybody has their own reasons for doing it, but my particular reason is getting rid of something like this. We know that markup, as a themer or as a front-end developer, we know that markup can break or make a project, and I take this very seriously. I've written several blog posts on different ways of cleaning up markup on your Drupal website. Now, Drupal 8 has gotten a lot better with the markup, especially if you use the stable theme on your own custom theme, because it gets rid of a lot of the default markup that Drupal produces. But there's still some cleanup to be done, even if it's Drupal 8 with the stable theme. In this example here, for some of you, this may be an exaggeration, but it's really not. This is actually something that I worked on personally, and it's hard to find a way to properly theme something here with this kind of markup where there's excessive markup, there is CSS classes that have no meaning or no semantic at all. So having control of the markup makes a huge difference in your theme process, not only because the browser needs to go through less markup to render a page, but also SEO is big on good markup. even accessibility. Good, clean markup really helps with accessibility and search engine optimization. So to me, this is a huge benefit. Just this alone is a good reason for me to start working with components. But there are other things that can contribute to bad markup in Drupal. You know, the source of content can complicate the theming process. Different things provide different type of markup for you. Things like blocks, they have a specific markup that they spit out when a page is rendered. Views, content types, and any other modules that you may add to your site can contribute to how markup is produced at the end on the page. So these are ways and that challenge the way theming is done, because as I said before, markup can really complicate the theming process, not just make it harder, but also if markup is not properly structured, it can contribute to bad transition, you know, between breakpoints when you're working on a mobile website or a responsive website. So markup definitely is a huge factor for me to work with components. Ambiguous classes could create regressions. If you have classes that are used all over the website, you can potentially affect things somewhere else on your website that you didn't intend to affect because of the classes are just too broad, and obviously excessive and unnecessary markup. There's no reason to have 20 or 30 divs just to display a field on a page. So if we can get rid of all of that, that certainly will help us not only in the rendering process but also the way things are managed from a theming point of view. So how do components work? What are they? Components to me is something that is self-contained, that it doesn't depend on anything else for their look or for their behavior. You can grab a component and put it anywhere on your site, and it should look and behave the exact same way, regardless of what's around them. But they also can work together. So when you grab a collection of components, you can put them together, and their behavior, their look and feel should remain consistent, but together they can create a whole new environment or a whole new area of your website that makes it easier to manage because each component is addressed individually. In the example here, we have a component or a collection of components that we built that was individually put together. We have the hero component that we built with the heading. We have a filter bar that was put together to be able to filter results on our media items that you see here. This is one media item with several pieces, an image, a tag or category, as well as a title. And finally, we have a button that can be placed anywhere on your site and look and feel the same way. When you put them together, then we end up with something like this. At this point, we can move things around without affecting how each of these individual components look. We can move the media items all the way to the top or the filter bar to the bottom, and things should still look and feel the same way. So that's the beauty of a component, is that they don't depend on what part of the page they're on or which page they're on. They're their own thing, they're self-contained, and they can be individually targeted. The beauty of this is that you now have pieces of the website with unique names that make sense, that have meaning, and that you can individually address from the theming process without affecting other areas on your website. So that's one of the big advantages. When we break it down, is, as I said before, semantic markup is a big thing for me. We at Media Current, we use the BEM technique for theming or assigning class names to our elements, and components lend themselves really nicely to this approach because we're able to create a structure of markup that has meaning, that makes sense. When you look at any piece of a component, you can know exactly where that component belongs because of the name and the markup that it uses. So in the example of the media item that we showed before, is an image with some kind of a category and a title, and the markup that makes that media item is something like this, where we have a global wrapper for the item itself. Within that, we have a wrapper for the image, or you can apply the class to the image itself if you like, if you want to get rid of an extra div there. And then we have a wrapper for the text items. Within that, we have a media item type, which is an H5 in this case, and an H4 for the title itself. So just by looking at these classes, we know exactly where each of these items belong. So when you are going to make changes to something like this later on, you know exactly where to go to find this particular code. You will go into the media item component, and all the code that was written for this component will be there. So there's no need to be wandering around or trying to figure out where things are. Things naturally fall into place as far as where they belong, what part of the component they belong to. So this makes a huge difference when you're theming something like this, because you're isolating this particular item from everything else on your website. Here is an example of a gallery with multiple media items. Again, the principle is the same. You repeat, in this case, where we go to gallery items, that's the wrapper for all the items. And within that, you have the gallery item, and that is repeated for as many times as you want to repeat the media items. Compared to this, there's really no comparison, because here there's no beginning or end to where you can start figuring out what class to use to make that the parent wrapper or the child wrapper. So again, markup to me is a huge advantage of using components. And here we are again with the example. So the media item list that you see, where we have the one single media item that we repeated 4 times, and it's still the same component. We didn't have to build that over and over again. We built it once, and now we can reuse it over and over again. So that's the next advantage, is reusable components. Working on a project that we recently released, the longer we worked on this project, the less components we were building, because we were continuing reusing the components we originally built. So it really helps. It may be an overhead or a little bit of more time and work investment at first, but in the long run, you turn out to saving time and work, because you're not rebuilding every piece of the site. Backend and front-end developers love it. It used to be that we were blocked by backend development, because we needed to wait for the backend development to be done on a Drupal site before we can start theming those pieces of the site. But now, using a living style guide, which I'll talk about in a minute, we can actually have a head start on front-end development, building all of our components, styling them, adding any JavaScript or behaviors if they need to have. And then we don't even have to wait for the backend development to be done, or even to start. We can start building those ahead of time. In fact, backend developers love the idea, because now they can start building things in the backend and start already seeing what things will look like or how things will behave. So that's some of the comments that we received from backend development. Clients really, really love it. On a particular case, we are making this living style guide to our client, and they can start doing QA right directly on the style guide. They don't have to wait for everything to be done in Drupal for them to start providing feedback on components as we are building them. So it's a great way to show the client not only how things will look and feel, but also a progress, how the client can see how things are moving along, because they can start seeing all the different components that we are building as we are building them, because the style guide is directly available to them. And as I said before, teams love it, from all the way from front end to back end and everybody in between. It's just a great approach that is really helping us tremendously here at Media Current. Some of the tools that we use, this could vary from project, from agency to agency. We are constantly keeping up with the latest technologies, something that always finding ways to improve our workflow. And so we don't focus so much on the tools. We focus more on the approach of doing something. So how do we theme something, regardless of what tool we use? What approach of theming do we follow? So components is something that you can implement with any type of tools that you want. And obviously, you may have tools that work for you. In our case, we use Yamen, we use Bower, we use Gulp, NPM. We have not used Pattern Lab, but I know it's one of the tools that is very popular when it comes to working with components in Drupal. We do use KSS Node for our living style guide, which is a system that was built by, I believe, John Alvin, who is a great contributor to the Drupal community, and is a system that allows you to build components and make those components available to Drupal. And obviously, everything we do is pretty much node-based, so we don't use Ruby for any of SAS or anything like that. We use libSass. But these are some of the tools, and again, these tools are not required. This is just the tools that work for us. But you may be able to find other tools that work for you that will make your life easier. So highly recommend that you look into some of those tools. The style guide that I mentioned before is a way for us to start showcasing what we're building as we're building it. And here's an example of a component and style guide, the brand colors for a particular project. This is a nice way for us to have access to what those colors are, have access to those variables. So when we need to use them, we just grab them, copy and paste them where we need to copy and paste them. Here's a component, which is actually a component that I'll be demoing in just a little bit, how this is built on a style guide, and then how you can transfer and integrate this within Drupal. It's a nice way for the client, for example, to come over and see, okay, this is the component that I'm looking at. Does it look, does it feel the way it's supposed to be? Does it match our design concepts? And does it behave the way it's supposed to? So to the client, it doesn't really matter that this is not in Drupal. As long as the component looks and behaves the way it's supposed to, they're good with that. So we're not longer waiting on development to be done for the client to take a look at how this is moving along. Here's another example. Another component on the style guide is a combination of multiple media items, but different layout. And as you can see, even though we have a completely different component here, a combination of component, the items that were originally built once, we can reuse them over and over again. So what I wanted to do now is jump into a quick demo on how to build a component. And what I like to do is I wanted to take the approach of the blog series that I'm working on, which is a three-part series. The first part focuses on building the component on the style guide using Twig. The second part focuses on getting Drupal ready, creating the content types, creating the paragraphs types for the backend functionality of the component. And the last part focuses on integrating what we did on the style guide with Drupal. So in a way, kind of connecting the both of them together to make that work in Drupal. So again, this process is very detailed described on the blog series. Part 3 of that series will come out next week. But what I have here is the demo theme that you see there. This is the code that was used to build that blog series. So all the code is actually an actual theme that you can use and includes the component that we'll be talking about. And then at the bottom you have the URL for a blog where you can find that blog series. If you have not read that, I highly recommend it. There's other great blog series out there by 4Kitchens where they talk about KSS Node, difference between KSS Node and Pattern Labs, and a few other blog posts by them on component-driven development as well that I highly recommend. So with that, I'd like to quickly jump to a live demo, and I apologize ahead of time. I've never done this particular demo before. It's just going to be a walkthrough, but if something breaks, I already have something pre-made that I can just jump into quickly if things get a little crazy. So before I go into the demo, I wanted to thank you. I always forget to come back to this slide, but I want to thank you on behalf of Media Current for taking the time to learn about components. So let's quickly jump into the demo. Let's see here. So I'll start by showing you the component that we build. And I think when I was transferring to this theme, I brought something because the JavaScript is not working at the moment, at least not on the style guide. It works on the Drupal side, but something I have to fix that. So as soon as I fix it, I'll push that to the demo theme that we have on GitHub, so you can have that fixed as well. So here's the component. Pretty straightforward component, but it's something that is pretty popular on a website, right? Somebody's profile. So we have several pieces of information here. This component is called card. And this is our style guide here with KSS Node. We have an image field for this component. We have a name for the person, some kind of label, social media items, and then we have biography that when you click on this, it expands. I brought something here, that's why it's not working, but I'll show you how it works actually in Drupal. So, so those are the parts that make up this one component. So let me start first by showing you the style guide part of this component. So I'll jump to the demo theme. This is the same theme that you can have access to on GitHub. So let me collapse all of this here. So here's our theme here, demo. And this is a typical structure of a Drupal 8 theme. Yours may or may not be different. It all depends. It doesn't matter how your theme is structured. But we usually here at Media Current, we have a source folder where we have all of our working files, source files, and we have a distribution folder, which is where all the end product is pushed into. And then we have the typical, info file, libraries, demo.theme file. So all of those files that you would normally see on a typical Drupal 8 theme. We have package.json, which gives us all the dependencies for our theme. And we have a Gulp file, which basically outlines all the different tasks that we run on our theme, things like compiling Sass, compiling our style guide, compressing files, linting our code, and things like that. So let me jump to the source folder. Within the source folder, we have components, which is where all of our components live. Then we have a global folder for anything that is global across the entire website, across our entire theme. Layout for any layout specific partials there, Sass partials, and templates. This is a Drupal templates folder where you will put any custom template suggestions that you create for your website. So within the components folder, we have each component is separated into its own folder. And in the example here, we have the card component. Everything that this component needs lives inside this folder. The reason for this is because we want to make sure that things are self-contained. And the beauty of this is also that this makes this component portable, not just within your website, but even within other projects. You can grab this card component and drop it into any theme, and all the resources that you need will be there for this component. So let's start with the Twig template. So this is the template that creates the markup, right? The markup that we talked about before that it would be nice to have control over. So here's what we've done is we have a wrapper card, and this is, again, we're starting to take advantage of making use of semantic names that make sense. In this case, we want to create a card component, so the class for the wrapper will be card. Here, this is a placeholder that you can do this with Twig or KSS Node. Where you can apply a modifier class. So if you have multiple looks for a specific component, let's say on one page the text of a component is blue, on the next page it needs to be orange. So you can add a modifier class that that you can use later on to make those changes while still keeping the structure of the original component. So you don't have to build two different components for that, basically. And I'll show you how you can pass that class to a component like this. And so we have the card image for the person's picture that we saw in the component. We have the name of the person. Here we have a wrapper for the media, social media icons, and a label where it says follow on. And here is a for loop that we did in Twig to navigate through our source and print out each icon. Now, don't worry about this icon, the way we are printing this. This is just a way that we do it here at Media Current, but you can literally just print each icon. If you want to embed the icons yourself here, if you want to embed SVGs yourself, that's fine. This is just the way we use a macro, Twig macro, to iterate to different icons that we have and be able to print the one that we need. Now, let me, I removed this because this is the macro that I was talking about. We have a macro for icons, so I'm just basically importing it so we have access to that macro and able to do this here. But again, you don't have to worry about that. If you have a different way of creating icons or printing icons on your page, go ahead and feel free to do that. Now, what you see, these are placeholders, right? These are variables that we pass into our Twig template. Where are these coming from? Well, these are coming from our JSON page. JSON page is basically we create an object, a JSON object, where we create different variables. The variables for each of the elements on our component, things like the image, the name, the bio, and the social links. And then we create some kind of stock content, dummy content that we can pass to our component. And so when you see image and name on our Twig template, that's what that is the value of those variables that we have here. So this works really nice because now we can use the same variables when we're trying to pass Drupal content to our template by keeping the same variable names and let Drupal know which variable means which field in Drupal, and we'll talk about it in a minute. And then we have JavaScript, right? JavaScript is where all the behavior of a component needs to go into a Drupal behavior. Not every component will need JavaScript, so you may not have a JavaScript on every component. The styles, all the CSS or Sass styles live on a style sheet, and this is the key to building our style guide. This code, this commented code here, needs to be in place of every component style sheet. Here we're telling that the name of the component is card. So if I move this here, this name is referring to this here. We're saying that there's also a variation of this component where we can do something different with this component. So we're passing this modifier class that I talked about. So when we look at this here, we have this modifier class placeholder. And in our style sheet, we're saying, here's the modifier class that I want to pass to my component. The markup of this component is in the card Twig file, which is this here. And finally, what section of our style guide will this component live in? We're saying it's going to live in the components section, and it's going to be called card. So if you look at here, it's going to be in the components section, and it's going to be called card. The modifier class, what that does, and this is all done automatically by KSS Node, when you add a modifier class like we've done here, the style guide creates a second version of the same component with the modifier class that you've added. So if I wanted to, in this here, if I wanted to, for example, say on the modifier class that I added, what is it, card full, I think it is, background color. Let's just try this just for fun here, and let me compile this now. If I compile the styles again, or if I have watching for changes, I can do that. If I refresh, of course, in a live demo this doesn't work. Card full, is that what it is? Oh, I misspelled that, sorry. So let me. Of course, did I card? I might have, I may need to recompile the style guide itself. Maybe the class was, yep, it's not working for me today. I tested it last night and worked, absolutely. But, so, card image, card full. Let me try just, I'm not sure why it's not icon. Background color. I'll give it one more try. If it doesn't work, then we'll just have to take my word for it. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so I'm not sure. Maybe it didn't like the code red, the word red as the color. But anyway, so here's an example of just by passing the modifier class that we have a placeholder for here, and here's the modifier that we tell it that we wanted to use. We can do whatever we want with this component without having to rebuild the component again. The style guide rebuilds it for us automatically. So that's pretty neat. So that's the first part of the blog series that I mentioned. The first part is building this component, putting all the pieces together for the component on the style guide. Any assets, in this case, is just a picture of the lady there. We'll go into this. So we like to do this for every of our components, be able to have each folder have a component, or I'm sorry, each component having a folder within your components folder. So this is it. The next part that I want to show you is, okay, so our component is ready. This is ready for the developers to say, okay, this is what that looks like. I can even see the markup, what that markup looks like. And the backend developers can come and say, okay, great, this is what I need to build in the backend in Drupal, and here's the markup that I need to use to make that happen. So now we go to Drupal, and there's a few things that need to happen in Drupal for the component to be built. One, in this particular case, we are using the paragraphs module to build an entity for the component, and then we are putting the paragraph type that we build as a field inside a content type. So let's go through that real quick. I have a paragraph type that we build, and it's called card. If we inspect the fields, these are the same fields that our component needs, right? The biography, the name, the photo, and the social links. And then we went to a content type. And in this particular case, I use the basic page content type, but you can create your own custom content type if you like. So if I go to manage fields, one of the things that I did is I removed the body field from this content type, and I added a new field. Let me just quickly show you how I went into adding a new field, and I selected paragraph as the field type, and that's how you see this here. And that's an entity reference field, basically. So we're simply passing an entity as a field to our content type. If I want to add content, I go add content, and I'm going to do a basic page to create our node. And here's I can say, let me add a card to this node. And here's where I would upload the person's image, the name of the person, their biography, and their social links, right? The link, the URL, and the link name, like Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. So that's how the back end is done. Now, there's other things to take under consideration in Drupal, things like enabling or disabling caching, enabling debugging, so you can see which templates were built or are used by Drupal to render a particular component. So we have already debugging turned on, and again, all of this is on the blog series that I've been working on, so you can find all the details there. But if I inspect this component here, because we have debugging on, we have access to all these template name suggestions that Drupal is using to print everything on the page. And so by default, Drupal will use the paragraph HTML template, right? That's the default template that will be used for this particular paragraph type. And so what you need to do is go grab a copy of this file from the paragraph module and make a copy of that into your own theme's template folder. And what we did is we named it paragraph card because Drupal is making you a recommendation of what the name should be. So if I go to my theme and I expand templates, I have a copy of that paragraph template file, and I renamed it paragraph card based on the suggestion that Drupal gives me. And so that's that. Now let's take a look at what's happening here to make this happen, right? So I'm leaving all the comments from the original template. Let's ignore this for now. We don't have to. I'll explain in a minute what that is. So the only thing we're doing here, we are completely overriding this paragraph template. What we are doing is we are including the component that we already built up here. So this is our Twig template, right? So what we're doing here on our custom paragraph template is we are including that component. We don't have to recreate it again in Drupal. And so we're saying this at demo is called a namespace. A namespace is created by the component libraries module that John Alvin, I believe, was the one that created that module. It's a great module that you need to install and enable. And when you go into your info file, you create a namespace. So here we go, component libraries. This is the name of the namespace. This is the paths. And it's basically saying, where are your components? Well, my components are here, and any other sources too, right? But I'm mainly concerned about the components. So we're saying the demo namespace knows that our components live here in source components, which is where we created our original component here. And so when we're passing this component to our paragraph template, we're saying the demo namespace, and because it already automatically knows that it is pointing directly to the source component, now we just need to provide the name of the component template, Twig, card Twig. And then we are narrowing down the scope of the component as far as which variables or which content we're going to make available via this component. So we're saying we want to pass the image variable, which is the same variable, right, that we use on our JSON file, except this time in our paragraph template, we're passing the Drupal field for that particular element. For the name, we're passing the Drupal field for that particular element there. And same for the bio. The social links, we're just passing social. Well, how do we end up with social? How do we know which icons, which URL to use? What we did is we created a variable of a render array, right? So we individually grab the values of each of those fields. And we did this by using Kint. Kint is a debugging tool that allows you to have a good idea, a look of which variables are available to you on a page by inspecting your page. And so this is how we got to these values here. So for the first URL, for the first icon, I believe it's Instagram, this is the value for that. And this is for the second one, this for the third. So all of this, the only reason I did this is so this thing here looks cleaner. Otherwise, I could have just put all of this down here, but it will make it a lot harder to read this. So this is cleaner, it's easier to read. So instead of passing all of this here, I'm simply passing this variable that I created up here by using this render array here. And that's what, by doing this, we're telling Drupal, okay, here's the component template, and here are the values, but variables and valuables that we're going to pass. And once you refresh the page, this is what Drupal will show us. Here is actually, you can see the JavaScript is working here. I need to figure out how I broke it on the other side. So again, if you look at the code, we know that we are using the paragraph template that we built, the custom template. And here is our component, right? This is the card component. Here's all the different markup that we created. And this is why markup is so important, because now this makes it so easy to manage. We know exactly where all the styles, all the code for this particular component lives. And we can make it look any way we want by default. Well, not by default, but we make sure that this was responsive, so it works the same on any screen. And this is the same thing for the style guide. It's the exact same thing, except we only build it once on the style guide, and now Drupal can make use of that. So, so that's a very quick overview of the blog series that I'm still working on. First, we focus on the first part of that series is building this component on the style guide. The second part is getting Drupal ready for our component, building the installing the required modules and any debugging or caching tools. Also building the paragraph type, customizing our content type. And finally, the third part is creating our custom Twig template suggestion for paragraph, and then passing those values to Drupal using the same component that we built on part one of that series. So this is all I have for now. I could have gone a lot longer, but I know time is limited. And what I wanted to do is find out if there are any questions specifically about this process. I understand that there are many ways in which you can do this. There are probably other ways of how people are doing this, so it's a great way to kind of see what's out there, what's available, and pick the best way that works for you. This seems to work for us, and I hope that you find it useful, and hopefully I can answer some questions if there are any.
Sure, Mario, we have quite a few questions. I'll read them and ask them and answer as best you can.
Okay.
Okay, so one question from Igor. You're using BEM with Bootstrap or with other CSS frameworks? He is particularly interested in SUSE Singularity.
Oh, very good. Actually, we're not using any type of framework. That is all custom code that we've written using the BEM technique for naming classes. However, we are using this particular component. We're not using it, but on the project itself, we did use Singularity.js, which is a grid system for laying out, a structure of a page. So yeah, we definitely use Singularity. on any page that requires some kind of grid system. But this particular component is all custom code using the BEM technique.
Okay, a quick reminder, if possible, can you remind us what you're using for the style guide?
KSS Node, and I think there is a link. This is the theme that anybody can grab, by the way. And in here there is a link to KSS Node. So it's a GitHub project by John Alban, and so this is what we're using. There's tons of information on how to get started, how to get it set up on your Drupal project. So highly recommended. Again, the other one is Pattern Lab, which some of you may be familiar with. The reason for KSS Node for us is that it's a seamless integration between it and Drupal, because it was built by John Alban, who is a Drupal developer. So he does account for a lot of the Drupal processes and things that make it easier for integration. So.
Great. Question from Elaine. Are you using the paragraphs module?
Yes, we are using the paragraph module to, we first build a paragraph type, as I saw here, and some of these questions will probably come in early before so here, we build that paragraph type, and when we build when I modify my content type, I'm sorry, when I build my content type, and I added a field of paragraph field, and then the only requirement when you add the field is that you specify which reference type you want to reference. In this case, we're referencing the card paragraph type that we built earlier. Yes.
What gets the output into the dist folder? Is it just the CSS and the JavaScript?
Oh, that's done through Gulp. It's a task runner that we use for making all that happen. So if I go there, you will see all the different things that get compiled by running our tasks. And this can be done differently. Some people choose to compile all the style guide, all the Sass partials into a single file. The way we do it here, Media Current, is we create individual style sheets for each component and then compile those individually. As you can see, there's a card CSS there. So however many components we'll have, we will have that many separate CSS files. And then what we do through libraries, I don't think I talked about that. Let me see here. Okay, so libraries is the other thing that we are including the card library. Let me quickly show you here. I'm sorry, I missed that part. Here's the card library. And for the card library, we're saying we have some CSS that is a component, and here's the CSS for the card library. So here's the CSS card that I'm showing you up here. And then we have some JavaScript as well. Is right here, card bundle. And then that has a dependency of jQuery. And so, so that's how we are able to individually include the CSS and JavaScript per component. And instead of loading all that into every single page, we're only loading it into the component that needs those kind of resources. So when we go to the card component, we're saying, I want to load the card library that we built, and that will pass the CSS and the JavaScript that we built for that component. And that's how Drupal is able to take advantage of that.
Question from Alexander. Can you use a component in another component?
Absolutely. Let me see here. I could show you another project, but basically, let's say I have already a component built for my social media icons, and it's called social media as an example. Then what I can do is I can include I can import that component. Let's say this is it will be, in fact, I'm already doing here. This component for icons is how I'm getting this. But in short answer, yes. If you have a component for social media icons as an example, you can import it here. So instead of building it yourself, you already have it built somewhere else in a different component, and then you can take advantage of it within another component. That's called, nesting components, basically. So yes.
Question from Maria. What's your take on KSS KSS versus Pattern Lab? I know you choose one rather than the other. Is there a particular reason?
I haven't really played much with Pattern Lab. I know it's a great system. I know friends who use it and love it. We have been using KSS Node for a while already at Media Current, and that has worked out really well for us, especially because it lends itself to the Drupal ecosystem since it was built by John Alvin, who is big on Drupal. And so we really haven't had the need to experiment with anything else because KSS Node is working really well for us. But I think either one of those will probably be a great choice. It's just a matter of you determine, playing with each of them and figure out which one works better for you guys. For us, KSS Node just seems to work well, and there hasn't been really a big reason for us to try something else at the moment.
Question from Maria again. Does it ever happen after building the backend that the component needs to be readjusted? For example, when you're dealing with menus or forms?
Yes, there's times when that happens. Sometimes it could be a limitation of Drupal or how things are being built in Drupal that we need to adjust. The nice thing about that is that because we're doing everything at the component level, any adjustments will have to be here or through the styles here. So what that does is it ensures that your style guide is always in sync with Drupal because Drupal is using the components that you're building on the style guide. With Drupal 7, that was a little more challenging. And the reason for the easy integration is because of Twig. But with Drupal 7, that was a little more of a challenge because Drupal 7 doesn't use Twig for their templates. And so even though we could use Twig to build the components on Drupal 7, Drupal could not take advantage of those to render the components in Drupal. So to an extent, we have to kind of copy and paste some of the markup that we use when we build the component in Drupal on the style guide to use it on Drupal 7. On Drupal 8, that problem has been solved because now, as you can see, I'm building the component once here, and I'm having Drupal take advantage of that by simply including it here without having to rebuild it again. But yes, there are times when maybe requirements change. Maybe the client says, you know what, never mind, I like to have this show differently, so we need to make some adjustments. There's times when, depending on the difficulty of a specific functionality, we may have to still use Drupal markup for building something. But yes, in this particular project that we launched not too long ago, we did, I would say, 90 to 95% of theming was done all in the style guide without having to touch Drupal. So that's huge.
Question from Nia. Can we build components through a module instead of a theme?
Probably. I'm not a backend developer myself, so I can't really. I know there's some talks in the future, in the next couple hours about that. Derek Rees, who is one of my colleagues, he's excellent when it comes to that backend development stuff, so he can probably give you a better answer. But it's hard. I really can't say it for sure.
Okay, question from Maria. How do you deal with CSS cascading versus having a component be completely isolated? For example, fonts for headings.
Yeah, so some of those things can be done globally. So the things that you expect to be used throughout the entire website, you will address those globally. And for example, here we have under base, I think there's some fonts, maybe I haven't added yet here, but you have typography and you have typography here too. So those are the things that you would address globally, not per component. But as far as cascading, because the styles that we write are specific to a component, then it doesn't matter in which order the CSS shows up for those, because it will only address that component. For anything that is more global, then you will need to account for this cascading order, and that's something that you can achieve through either libraries or the way you import your partials. For example, if I go to the global, we have this. Let me quickly show you here. We have this global SCSS where we can import all of our partials that are global. And so here's where you would determine what order you want those particular partials to be rendered at.
Okay, a question from Miro. Does KSS support including components in other components? If yes, how can you pass values to those included components from Drupal?
Yes, so I answered that earlier, and yes, we can. It does support, and the way you allow for Drupal to pass values is the same way, because when you build a component, if you do it in the way that we are doing it here, so we have a JSON file where we determine what values or what data that particular component needs. We have a variable and we have some value here, and so it doesn't matter that you are including this component into another component. These are still, the component still expects these variables and the values, the respective values to be passed from Drupal. So in the case of our card component, if I'm including another component here, I will need to still specify those fields the same way we've done it here. So if I was to include another component here, for example, let me see here. If I want to include another component, let's say whatever we want to call this, demo, that's a demo component. Whatever fields or whatever variables that component was built with up here is the same things that it should be expecting on Drupal. So whatever these fields are in Drupal, that's what they should be, and then the variable names should be whatever were assigned when the component was built.
Question from Dory. Would this still work if you created a content type of card rather than a paragraph, other than changing the template name?
Absolutely. Yeah. In fact, on my blog series, I mentioned that there are many ways how this particular component can be built. I just chose paragraph just because it's easier to include it as a field in a content type. But yes, you could have created a card content type and create the same fields. And when you inspect your code, you would see which template needed to be created, a custom template. Most likely it would have been something like node -- card.html .twig. And then that's the template that you could have copied and make it available here instead of paragraph. And then do the same thing. This wouldn't change at all. This will actually remain the exact same. It's just you will be using a different template other than paragraph.
Okay, we've got a process question here. How is your front-end team set up? Is it the designers who implement the components?
No, we do this more at the front end part of the process. So we get a design from our design folks, and so we ourselves as front-end developers, we take that design and we break it up into what we think each piece should be a component. And that's how we start building things. So we take a look at a comp and start breaking things apart, and that's how we start creating components based on those pieces. We obviously take a very close look at what that is, what the requirements are as far as design, behavior, and things to determine what can be an individual component, what can be a combination of different components into one. So, but yeah, that's the process. We try to also identify those things that are global, things like social media icons, the navigation, a logo. Those things are global, so those can be individually created and find ways to be able to make sure that they also work when you combine them with other components.
What is the advantage of using paragraphs in your card content type versus defining the fields inside the card type?
No, well, I guess it depends on the project. One advantage of paragraph is, again, is you can include it as a field on a content type, and you can also have the ability to create multiple instances of the same component on a single node. Because you can just say that there's no limit, you can have multiple limits for that particular entity. So you can, in a single page, you can create 5 or 10 of different similar components. With content type, I would think it will just give you the ability to create one, or unless you want to repeat the fields again. But bottom line is, I just happen to choose paragraph. I could have chosen maybe a block, or just a content type, it doesn't really change the overall concept of the component. It's just whatever entity will work for you and your needs. That's what you should select.
Okay. Do you create components for layouts? If so, how do you deal with dividing styles for stuff like Flexbox? An example, the card has flex basis properties and its parent has stuff like justify content.
So we don't have a rule to say, we're using all Flexbox. We based the use of Flexbox or grids based on the requirement, based on what we think may work better, and also based on browser support requirements. So if the component that we're working on is a good candidate for using Flexbox, if the browser support requirements allow for that, then we obviously will use Flexbox. But we also have, Singularity.js that we use for most of our projects. So there will be times when that may work better. It all depends on what the requirements for, let's say, mobile or desktop may be. And again, having control of the markup also makes a big factor, because if we're depending on Drupal for the markup, Flexbox may not always be the best way to go, because we don't know if there'll be any unknown as far as markups, and that can throw off Flexbox very quickly if the markup structure is not the right one when you're defining something as a flex item. So, but yeah, again, a lot of the reasons for using specific techniques for us is based on requirements based on the project. We have a host of tools that we use, but we make sure that we use them when the project needs it, when the project lends itself to it, not just because it's the cool thing to do.
How are you configuring your Gulp files to watch changes on components and global elements?
Yeah, so we have quite a few tasks here in our Gulp file. We obviously require, set up our required plugins. We use Gulp.js, we don't use libSass, so this is libSass basically, autoprefixer for any vendor prefixes. So we don't have to worry about adding or removing vendor prefixes. We let that handled by autoprefixer. Source maps is nice because when you're inspecting your styles on the browser, if you don't have this set up, you don't know what the actual code came from, which partial it came from. So this allows you to see what partial the code that you're looking at came from. Browser sync, every time you save something, if you want the browser to refresh automatically. We use linters for Sass and JavaScript, so we know that we are not using. So we're using the best practices for writing code, minimize images, and a few other things. But we have several tasks. In this case, compile our Sass in JavaScript. So this is all going to be there on the demo repo that I have there, so you can take a closer look at this. But it's very self-explanatory on what each task does and how things are moving from source to the distribution. As you can see here, we have source. Here we have distribution down here somewhere for where things are moving. Here, distribution for style guide, for all of our CSS is moved there. I don't think it's that complicated. I think it's pretty typical of a lot of Gulp projects. But again, I would say take a look. There's a great article, I think it was by CSS Tricks on Gulp for beginners or something to that effect, where they walk you through how to create a Gulp file like this, basically. It's really helpful, so I highly recommend if you're looking into that. But this helps us a lot as far as the workflow, automating a lot of the tasks, so we don't have to keep doing those by hand.
Is the card.json a static file, or is that the structure of the component?
It's both, actually. It's a static file, but it also provides with all the content for the component, for any given component. The nice thing is that Drupal, through the namespace that we created, is able to look at the variables that the component needs. And the only thing that we're providing on the template here is that we're changing this stock content to actual Drupal fields. But this here, Drupal knows that these variables are coming from the JSON file, and expects those same variables here, but then now we're passing Drupal content instead of the fixed or static content.
Okay. Can component-driven theming also work with different Drupal distributions? In particular, Thunder CMS.
I haven't played with Thunder. I've looked into Lightning myself, and yes, I don't see why not. This is all a theming. Well, let me take that back. Obviously, it all depends on how much control you have with the back end, right? So if you're able to manipulate your templates, your Twig templates in the back end any way you want, then there's no reason why you shouldn't use component, because the front end is basically it's just theming a website, and that can be done any way you want in Drupal. But if you want to have that communication between your front end style guide in this example and the back end in Drupal, the requirement will be for you to be able to have control of those templates, which I don't see that being an issue on any of those distributions. You should be able to create your own custom template suggestions as you would on any other Drupal installation.
Question from Daniel. Is there a performance hit with copying fields into components and including components in templates?
I don't see that. We've launched a couple of Drupal 8 projects in the last couple of weeks where we use this exact same process, and performance has not been an issue. Obviously, as with any other project, whether it's component or not, there still has to be some front end and back end optimization for performance. So I don't think the component, because we're still just passing the data that will still need to be passed anyway on a Drupal page. It's just we're choosing a different way of passing that data, but the data we're passing is still the same way. Whether we are embedding components into other components, I don't think that makes a difference, because if we were not using components, those pieces of the website still need to be rendered. If anything, we are actually optimizing a lot of that by cleaning up the markup and ensuring that we're only passing the information that we need. And in the case of styles or JavaScript, the way we're doing it is we are just including those for the components that need it. So we're actually limiting the JavaScript and CSS that is available on any given page to only be the one that a component needs. So if anything, I think that's probably improving performance.
Great. Well, I really appreciate your time, Mario. That was a great presentation and inspired a lot of questions at the end.
Well, thank you so much, and thanks a lot for all the questions. I hope that we can keep this going. Feel free to contribute, grab the theme that I made available. I need to make a couple of fixes there, but other than that, you'll be able to have access to all of this here. Comment on the blog post series, and if you haven't joined the Twig Slack channel, highly recommend it. There's a lot of resources there for us to talk about components and Twig in general. So Drupal Twig, I believe, is the Slack channel. So thank you again for the time. I appreciate it, Steve. Thanks for the opportunity, and congratulations on this great event that you put together. Hopefully it's not the last one, and I'll be happy to help out again if I can. So have a great day, everyone.
Wonderful. Thanks, Mario. Maybe same time next year for Drupal 8's second birthday.
Sounds good. Thank you.
And thank you so much for everyone who attended. We're about halfway through Drupal 8 Day, which means we have about, I think, 8 great more presentations to come. Thanks for coming to this one, and I hope to see you at one of our sessions later today.